On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, US Shipbuilding is... I can't say that in the first 15 seconds of a YouTube video. Or I get in trouble with YouTube. I see. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So we're going to talk about how screwed up US Shipbuilding is. I obviously can't use this word or for fear of being demonetized by the big powers at YouTube. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what is going on with shipbuilding. Now, you may remember Sal being very optimistic and very happy about this shipbuilding offensive that was initiated by the Trump administration. We had an executive order. We had issues come out from Congress with things like the Ships Act. We had the U.S. Trade Representative and their Section 301. Well, we seem to hit a couple of bumps here along the way. Not surprising, not really surprising. We did not expect this to be a smooth rollout. But there have been a lot of hurdles that have been thrown up, and I think it's a good time to take a moment and reflect on them and see where we currently are. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So we have this story here from Mike Schuller over at GCaptain. China shipbuilding market share plummets as U.S. port fees loom. So the issue with the U.S. Trade Representative and the Section 301 seems to be having a bit of an impact. We're seeing the share of Chinese shipbuilding decrease, and it has dropped from nearly 70% down to just above 50%. Now, this is in terms of contracting. This is order book. Orders are being placed. And you see Korea on an uptick here and other nations on an uptick, but with China on the downward trek. While the diminishing of Chinese shipbuilding may be taking place, what we're not seeing is an increase in U.S. shipbuilding. As a matter of fact, what we're seeing is a little bit of chaos over on the U.S. shipbuilding side. This story from Reuters over at GCaptain: Trump's shipbuilding push falters as the National Security Council Maritime Office is gutted. So two of the main individuals over at the NSC's Maritime Office, Ian Bennett, who is a senior director for Maritime and Industrial Capacity, has left. He's taking a VP job in a commercial firm. And then the National Security Council's Chief of Staff, Brian McCormick, has also departed. Now, the National Security Council was in a lot of trouble anyway. Mike Waltz, who had been the National Security Advisor, left. He was kind of booted out of that position. He's supposedly the designee to be UN ambassador. He'd gotten into trouble with that whole Signalgate issue with the release of information about the strikes on Iran. Not the most recent strikes, but the strikes previous to that. The National Security Office's Office of Shipbuilding was the lead agency. They were implementing the executive order, in particularly getting the information from all the different agencies to put together the Maritime Action Plan. Well, now it seems as if the Office of Shipbuilding is not gutted, but moved, and it's going to be moved over to the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB. Now, I will say that this story got a lot of legs thanks to friend of the show, John Conrad over at GCaptain. John posted a kind of interesting tweet the other day on X that kind of got a lot of attention, where he listed out a lot of issues that are at play here. He also referenced a recent podcast that he and I did over on Chris Cavas and Chris Savello's podcast, the Cavas Ship Podcast, where we talked about what was going on. He talked about the fact that the Federal Maritime Commission is down 2 commissioners. They have only 3 of the 5 commissioners there. There was a USNI panel with U.S. Navy shipbuilders there who talked about that they feel like commercial shipbuilding is going to rob from Navy shipbuilding. But the best part was Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly responded to John, initially calling John fake news, which I will forever enjoy the title of that. But what she did post was the fact that the shipbuilding office will operate under OMB, and they are going to be overseeing part of the $43 billion in the shipbuilding investment that was in the most recent big, beautiful bill. So we know that there's $43 billion now that are allocated to shipbuilding. The question is, how is that money going to be appropriated? Is it going to the Navy? Is it going to commercial? We just don't know. Is it going to the Coast Guard? Because when you look at what's going on with shipbuilding in the U.S. right now, it is not good. So let's just run through the stories that are out here right now on it. Mike Schuller's Pentagon calls shipbuilding a top priority, but Congress says budget falls short. This was a story back in June. Now, the FY 2026 new ship construction proposal put out by the Navy actually only had 4 vessels that were being proposed. They had a Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine. They had a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine. They had a Tagos surveillance vessel and money to buy one used sea lift vessel. However, now there's 19 vessels that have been added to this with the appropriation from the Big Beautiful Bill. That has increased, number one, an additional Virginia-class attack submarine, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, an America-class big-deck amphib, 9 of the medium landing ships for the U.S. Marine Corps to be used with their littoral strike regiments. The 2 John Lewis-class oilers will be added. Additionally, a new strategic sea lift ship will be built. What is missing from this is any Constellation-class frigates. These were the frigates that were built to a Italian-French design, the Frem class, but the U.S., because of the need to incorporate U.S. weaponry and U.S. components into it, had to basically change that design. Instead of taking a design that they can build off the shelf, they changed 85% of that design. And unfortunately now there is no money in the budget to be building any more. Now there is previous money that's allocated and funded, and several of the ships are funded, but there is no new money for it. And I would argue that the Constellation class frigate is in grave danger of being canceled. And without frigates, we're seeing issues about that for the close escorting of ships, for example, through our favorite area of the world, the Bab el-Mandeb. Then you get a chain of horror stories. So this one from Mallory Shelbourne over at USNI News. Carrier John F. Kennedy delivery delayed 2 years. Fleet will drop to 10 carriers for 1 year. Oh. So the Ford-class carriers that are replacing the Nimitz-class, now we have 10 Nimitz-class carriers. The Ford took a long time to build. She is just deployed on her second deployment over to the Mediterranean. The Kennedy is the follow-up ship. That ship was laid down. Now, this ship is not going to be ready now, not in 2025, but in 2027. That ship was laid down, started construction in 2015. 12 years to build this ship. Now, the reason Kennedy is so delayed for a variety of reasons, you have COVID, obviously, was a big issue, but more importantly, they robbed from Kennedy to finish the Ford. And so a lot of the components and issues that they needed to get on this. This, however, is a problem. It took 10 years to get Ford up and running. It's taking 12 years to get Kennedy up and running. It's going to take at least 8 years to get Enterprise, then follow-on carrier up and running. There's no way you maintain 11 fleet carriers out there if you are building one every 10 to 12 years. There's just no way. This is a major problem for the U.S. Add to it, we're seeing the same thing on the big deck amphibs that are being built also by Huntington Ingalls, but this time down in Pascagoula, not Newport News. Both the Fallujah and the Bougainville are going to be delayed. Now, these big deck amphibs are absolutely essential. They need them. The Marine Corps need them to be able to deploy the Marine Corps. Plus, we are already down a big deck amphib because we allowed Bonhomme Richard to burn up in San Diego Harbor back in 2020 because the Navy doesn't have proper firefighting equipment staged in their bases to prevent a shipboard fire. One thing that I hop on, along with John Conrad, a lot about is there's no friggin' fireboats in the major Navy ports. Then the Trump administration just canceled some of the offshore patrol cutters at the Eastern Shipbuilding over delays and rising costs. So the Coast Guard is undergoing a fleet replacement program. They're replacing their old 210 and 270-foot medium endurance cutters. The 210s are over 50 years old, probably about 60 years old now, some of them. And these new offshore patrol cutters, about 25 of them, are going to be the replacement for them. They started building them at Eastern Shipbuilding in Panama City, Florida. This is the largest build that Eastern had ever done. They had never built anything of this scope and scale before. They had built fireboats and tugs, but nothing the size of a medium-sized warship. And they got hit by a hurricane, but more importantly, Eastern Shipbuilding was just in a lot of trouble building this. And what we've seen now is that the third and the fourth hull of the ship is being canceled. This is the launch of the first ship, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Argus. I want you to note something here. Where Eastern built this was on a dirt field. I mean, there's dirt there. I mean, this gives you an idea of the kind of the nature of that shipyard. Now Eastern suffered a lot from the hurricane. They were challenged because of the scope and scale of this, but the construction contract was awarded over to Austal in Mobile, and they have started building more. They've got basically the second phase of these cutters, but it's probably not going to see a lot of these cutters come operational anywhere near the time frame envisioned. At the same time, the U.S. government has canceled the 11th National Security Cutter being built over at Huntington Ingalls. This was an add-on to the original order by the Coast Guard. Coast Guard wanted 10 national security cutters. This cutter was ordered. It was paid for. Equipment had been procured for it. Now they are not going to build it. I have a lot of questions about this one, why this cutter is being canceled. I think they should have built it. They had everything there. There were delays in getting it built. Basically, this cutter had low priority because HII in Pascagoula was diverting resources over to the building of Burke-class destroyers, LPDs, and to the large deck Amphibs. However, I think this last cutter could have been brought into the Coast Guard, could have been brought into the Navy as a potential frigate, since we're not getting the Constellation. But again, it just demonstrates problems with shipbuilding in the U.S. You get this story also over at G Captain Mike Humbert. U.S. to partner with Canada and Finland to fix the icebreaker program in shipbuilding. You want to look at a disaster of a shipbuilding program, it is the icebreaker program. Initially bought over to VT Halter, then it came over to Bollinger because Bollinger bought VT Halter. The Coast Guard icebreaker program has been a mess. I mean, just an epic mess. Largely because they brought Naval Sea Systems Command into it, and they decided to award this to a shipyard to keep that shipyard alive, VT Halter. And it has just been a disaster to get a replacement icebreaker out there for the Polar Sea and the Polar Star. If that's not enough, you can go to a batch of GAO Government Accountability Office reports that highlight a whole batch of issues. So, for example, there's a GAO report on the Maritime Administration's Shipbuilding Support Program, which is minuscule. It doesn't provide anywhere near the funds necessary to support shipbuilding in the United States. But then again, we don't have an administrator. We had one designee, which was Brett Sadler from Heritage. His nomination was removed, and now we have Steve Carmel, but we haven't heard from Steve Carmel because once you nominate someone for a position, you never hear from them again until their confirmation hearing, because nobody ever wants to say the wrong word and fear that they lose their confirmation. You have a GA report on Navy shipbuilding and ship repair, and I could just highlight the issues here. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into this. Mainly, we don't have enough repair facilities, and the repair facilities we do have are overwhelmed by the Navy because the Navy can never get their ships in on time. The scope of work changes every time, and that throws the entire repair cycle off. Not the least of which, too, is that they depend on small contractors and small manufacturers for a lot of replacement parts, and that creates a supply chain bottleneck. Same thing, GAO report on surface ship maintenance. I mean, when you look at the surface ship Navy, you get this story. GAO Navy wasted $1.84 billion in repairs to cruisers cut from the fleet. The Navy and cruisers have been a disaster. We built 27 Ticonderoga class cruisers. We got rid of the cruisers without the VLS, the vertical launch cells. That brought us down to 22. 22 is a great number because that gives you 2 cruisers with each of the 11 carriers. Well, you don't really need 2 cruisers, you just need 1. So we went down to 11, and then the decision was to go down to 7, and now we're down to 3, and we're going to get rid of those 3 too. But the amount of money, USS Gettysburg, for example, or Anzio as depicted here, are cruisers where we've just have been holes in the water we've thrown money into. You also have stories like this. The poor material condition of Navy amphib fleet prevents marine deployments, training, says the GAO. I mean, if you look at the big deck amphibs, the recent deployment or attempted deployment of the USS Boxer is a case in point. I, for the life of me, don't understand why the Boxer, which tried to deploy, had a rudder failure, came back into San Diego, and they had to fix that repair in the water. There was not a dry dock available to pull the Boxer into. I want to know, what was the dry dock availability at Pearl Harbor and Puget Sound, the 2 Navy shipyards? The Navy still operates 4 public shipyards. They're largely allocated for nuclear vessels, obviously submarines and aircraft carriers. However, one of the reasons you have these dry docks at Puget Sound and Pearl Harbor is to provide rapid repair in time of war. Why was it Boxer could not been brought up to Puget Sound or Pearl Harbor, put in a dry dock and repaired, akin to what we did with USS Yorktown, before the Battle of Midway in 1942? If we can't do that in peacetime, how are we going to do this in wartime? Okay. things are bad in shipbuilding. I mean, they look bad. I mean, just things don't seem to be going quite the way we want them to. But hey, there's hope on the horizon. I mean, again, we just had the introduction of the Ships Act over in Congress. Well, when you look at where the Ship Act is right now, it gives me a little bit of pause. So the Ships for America Act of 2025 was introduced in the House by Representative Trent Young, a Republican from the 1st District of Mississippi. The problem, and what gives me pause about this bill didn't go to one committee, didn't go to 2 committees. It went to 12 committees. 12 committees for comment. House Armed Services, Transportation and Infrastructure, Ways and Means, Energy and Commerce, Foreign Affairs, Oversight and Government Reform, Education and Workforce, Financial Services, Judiciary. Why does it go to the Judiciary Committee? Why are judges, the people who pick judges, why is this an issue in Judiciary? Natural Resources, Science, Space and Technology. There's no space. These are not spaceships. We know that, right? These are water boaty, floaty things, right? And then finally, Veterans Affairs. 12 committees. 12 committees. If you don't know how a bill becomes a law, go watch the Schoolhouse Rock thing. But this is going to slow this up quite a bit. But the good thing is we know that shipbuilding is a priority. We keep hearing that. The president says it. Everybody says it. There's a massive priority for it. And we have a huge program out there that is trying to get workers into the workforce. Just watch Mike Rowe give a talk where he's talking about that. I keep getting called about more workers in the workforce. But then you see crap like this where Huntington Ingalls Newport News Shipbuilding furloughs 471 shipbuilders. Now, I do think that there's a sub-story here that's not come out yet, and I think it has a lot to do with an issue about welding and improper welds. But this is not the story you want when you're trying to get people to come into a job force that is desperately needed, and that is shipbuilding, when Huntington Ingalls Newport News furloughs 471 ship workers. It just does not look good. I would argue what needs to happen here, and ironically it doesn't deal with shipbuilding, is we need to get ships in the fleet. We need to get boats out there. I mean, it's what we need. We need to start showing that we're seeing an uptick in numbers in both the Navy and Coast Guard, but also in the commercial fleet. And there is some prospect for that. So, for example, Hanwha is moving to reflag Korean-built LNG carriers under the U.S. flag. One of the things that John Conrad noted in his tweet, and also came out in the Reuters story, you have people like Rudolph Sade, the president of CMA CGM, who came to the White House, is offering $20 billion to invest in U.S. shipping. He wants to invest in shipyards. He wants to reflag vessels from the CMA CGM fleet into the U.S.-flagged APL fleet, the old American President's line. But he doesn't know who to talk to because there's nobody in charge. And here's a move. Hanwha wants to move and reflag Korean-built LNG carriers under the U.S. flag. But to get them into the U.S. flag, which isn't a problem, it's easy to reflag, you've got to make them, first off, you got to make sure they're profitable, which means they're going to need to be an offset for the higher waged U.S. crews, and there needs to be priority cargo. There needs to be cargo. It means cargo preference. It means you have to haul X amount or X percentage of liquefied natural gas on U.S. flagged vessels. Now, I have a way to fix the problem with U.S. mariners and how to get more mariners out there. It's very simple, is if you work more than 180 days out of the year outside the United States, no federal income tax. None. Zero. That gives merchant mariners the ability to work on ships on the high seas, and they don't have to pay any federal income tax. It literally almost doubles their salary or their take-home pay that they get. So that now if they're offered $150,000, they're actually making close to that when they sail. And it's not a real big impact on a lot of other industries out there, for example, like airline pilots, because airline pilots don't spend half their year outside the U.S. They're flying back all the time. So this would prioritize it. Now, the flip side of that is you have a commitment from them that they will agree to sail in time of war or national emergency, be called back, enlist them in something like the U.S. Maritime Service. Great article just recently written over by Admiral Mark Busby, former Maritime Administrator, about bringing back the U.S. Maritime Service. The other option here that we see, the Coast Guard has just taken in a commercial icebreaker and brought it into the fleet. The icebreaker Storis is set to achieve achieve its initial operating readiness by August of 2025. This ship was built down in the US by West. This vessel demonstrates that you can basically bring ships in. So while the Coast Guard is waiting, for example, for the OPC, the Offshore Patrol Cutters, to come online from Austell and Eastern, why not go down to the Gulf Coast and get some offshore support vessels, some OSVs, reflag them in and bring them in? Because while we may not be seeing big deep draft vessels being built in the US, we are seeing some pretty good medium-sized vessels built in the US. Mike Schuller noted that last month when the U.S. built Eco Liberty ushered in a new era for American offshore wind vessels. This vessel, the first offshore wind vessel built, was down in the Gulf Coast. So we're building ships in the United States. We just need to get this ramped up, but it takes a while to build vessels. In the meantime, we need to be reflagging vessels in, bringing vessels back in. We need to be adjusting how we repair vessels, how we oversee their maintenance. All of this needs to be done. But the most critical thing, I keep saying this, is you got to put some people in charge. We just got a designee to be the Assistant Secretary of the Navy to oversee the shipbuilding side for them. The Navy has just appointed Jason Potter to be the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. He's going to have to go through his confirmation hearing. His background is as a staff member for 10 years. He was on the Senate Appropriations Committee for Defense, and on the committee for the Sea Power Subcommittee. And before that, he was with the U.S. Navy, seemed to have been largely on the staff at the CNO's office as an assistant. Now, we need people to be in charge. And the question is, while the Navy now seems to be having Jason Potter in that role once the confirmation takes place, on the commercial side, we're still kind of rudderless. We're missing 2 of the 5 commissioners of the Federal Maritime Commission. We do not have a maritime administrator. We have a deputy and we have an appointee, but we don't have that confirmation in place yet. Under the Ships Act, we're supposed to have a maritime advisor along with the Maritime Advisory Board. That's not in place yet. We do have a deputy administrator at MARAD, which is good, Sang Yi, and he has been out there trying to get the word out there about shipbuilding. But if we want to be serious about shipbuilding and get the U.S. going, we have got to get some butts in the seats. And that is a big problem. If you look at something like the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, for example, the top 3 posts there are empty. The superintendent, the deputy superintendent, and I know for a fact this one, the provost, is empty. So there is no one there to lead. The person in charge now is the chief of staff, who is acting superintendent. This is supposed to be producing the merchant mariners we need, the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And that's a good indication of where we're at right now. So there are a lot of problems. However, I do want to add one thing, because I think if you want to understand how this happens, how does the U.S. become a major shipbuilder again? Well, look at what China did. And there's a great article, I strongly recommend it. I'm probably going to break this article down a bit, by Brian Potter over at Construction Physics, on how China became the world's biggest shipbuilder. It is a great article. It is wonky as anything. It's got charts and graphs, goes back into the history. Love it. I love it a lot. I had a couple of just small, tiny little things with it. It leaves a couple of things out. But again, in terms of the scope and scale, it is great. It is fantastic. I strongly recommend it. I'll obviously have the link in the show notes here for you to take a look at. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you hit that super thanks button down below where you can contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon and you can become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until our next episode, this is Sal saying aloha.